I'm so happy to be here again with Lucas Van Oss, and we have a job today to tackle the book Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. I started reaching out a couple of months ago looking for somebody who wanted to talk about this with me because the end of the book was very perplexing to me the first time I read it, and I thought, I've got to talk this over with somebody. Since then, I've reread the end of the book a couple of times and looked at some things that other people have said, and it makes a little bit more sense to me now. But Lucas agreed to be my conversation partner on this, and he's read it. And so we don't really know how to tackle it, but I will say that it's a little bit like two movies on one screen or
Mm.
two books in one or something like that. So, Lucas, why don't you give me a summary of what you think about the book in general, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's an absolute pleasure. I loved our former conversations, and when Karen emailed some of us being like, "I don't understand this book, can someone help me?" I was like, "I don't either. I haven't read it, but I'd love to give it a go because I love speaking on this channel." So I took it on. I read it first. Then I told you like I'm not ready to do this. I'm gonna have to do some more research. So I read it again and again, and I watched some very interesting lectures about it as well. And I thought it would be a nice idea to just start to sketch the scenery where we are, because when you start the book, you're immediately like thrown into this universe, and basically it takes place in a kingdom. The kingdom is called Glom, and it has some ties to the Greek world. So you can imagine it's like around 100 BC or something, and I think it's supposed to be maybe in Central or Eastern or Western Europe. So the Greek world is known to them, but it's not like, you know, integrated. And it's a very like pagan world. And the gods or the god there, her name is Anjit, is seems like a jealous god, and the sacred places are bleak places. And there's a lot of animal sacrifice. And so that's a very intense way to start. Like Lewis will describe the pigeon blood and the smell, the drench. Um, and so it's told from the point of view of the oldest daughter of the king, whose name is Oriel. So it's Orual. It's a bit hard to pronounce for me, but she's the oldest daughter. And when I first read it, I actually thought she was a slave because the way she experiences the world is like it's very horrific. Her father, the king, is like almost a tyrant, and he bosses her and her sister around at the start and all these things. So it feels like she's a servant, and she feels like that as well. I feel like in the story, and so that's the base premise. Do you have any thoughts thus far before I go on too long?
Well, I think you explained very well that the strangeness of it, the book when you first start reading it. um, I started it actually a year or two ago by listening to a reading that somebody was doing on YouTube. And I found it quite captivating, but I listened to a couple chapters of it and it just felt so weird. I didn't go on
Mm.
with it.
Yeah, and a lot
And
of people
and
say
then
this.
uh, and then I picked it up again several months ago and started listening again.
Mm.
And this time it really, well, in between then and now, I had reread The Discarded Image. And so some things made more sense to me. But it
Hmm.
is that very strange, it does make you think, what was it like in Old Testament times when they had all that blood sacrifice and the
Yeah.
temple was filled with all of that. And we don't think, usually when we read that stuff, we're not thinking of the sensory overload that must have
No,
accompanied all of that, right?
and it's not described in that way. Like here, it was
Yeah.
so vivid. You feel the experience for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
what you
I
said
mean,
about,
I understand why Lewis said he felt like this was his best work because
yeah,
um, he really evokes this whole world. Um, in a way, he does that also in like the Narnia Chronicles, but the Narnia world is so effervescent, kind of,
yeah,
right?
that's a good
Where
word.
this world is so dark and foreboding and challenging and difficult, but
Yeah.
that may be because of the narrator of the book, right?
Mm.
Because we're
Yeah, and
hearing
also
it through her mind.
Yeah, and because of Lewis himself, because he tried to write this story before when he was not a believer. So
Hmm.
Oriole, the character, she's angry with the gods, and she's upset that they don't really show themselves, and they seem to be jealous. They seem to be, unfair to her. And
Hmm.
so you really see that Lewis struggled with this himself throughout his life, which is I think why he said that this book was like haunting him for so long. He'd been wanting to write it since he was a young man, and you really feel that. And what you said before about picking it up, um, and then letting it go before reading it again, I think a lot of people have struggled so much with this book. Partly also why this is not one of his top rated books. People don't really speak about it so much. At the time, it was the worst received book he wrote, when he just brought it out. And at the same time, Tolkien, for example, thought it was his best book, and he thought it was his best book, like he said. So I think it's worth wrestling with it,
Hmm.
and I've certainly done that. But yeah, so she's angry with the gods, and
Well, and why is she angry with the gods?
well, I think the main reason is that her sister, her half sister Psyche, which Psyche comes from the myth Cupid and Psyche. That's why it's a myth
Well,
retold.
isn't she angry with the gods even from the very beginning?
Oh yeah, yeah. It starts at the
Yeah,
start, but
yeah.
it
So
gets even worse.
before Psyche was born, um, she had a little sister named Redival,
Hmm.
and Redival was very cute, had golden curls, and everybody adored her. And Orwell has always been told that she's ugly,
Yeah.
and not just ugly, but hideous.
Mm.
And so I think that's a big part of why she's angry with the gods,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she wasn't favored by the gods with physical beauty.
Yeah, in that sense for sure. And it's also why I think she was forced to wear a veil when she was younger. I think it was at a wedding of the king with his wife. And this is a theme that's going to come back because the name of the book is, of course, Still We Have Faces. Originally, it was named Bareface, but I believe the publisher didn't like that name so much. But she basically wore a veil then, and then she goes bareface. Um, and later on in the story, she takes on the veil again. And it's in a way to hide that ugliness that she was told that she had, but it also has some dark motives for herself, um, which is that, well, I think it's one of the bigger themes of this story, and the way I think I should speak about it is to first introduce Psyche properly, because Psyche is the third born sister, half sister of Oriole, and she's extremely beautiful. And Psyche is basically Oriole's greatest love. She loves her more than anything in the world, but she loves her in a way that some might call possessive. At least that's the way we understand it later on in the story. But while she's writing it herself at the start, she feels that she's justified in her love for Psyche. But as the story progresses, Psyche's beauty is almost seen as divine. So the people in the kingdom, they want to touch her and stuff. They want to be healed by her, and it turns her into this almost a deity, let's say. And afterwards, it turns the other way around, where Psyche turns into a sort of a scapegoat. I don't know. I don't exactly remember why. Were there things going wrong in the kingdom? Is that why she was?
Yes, yes. Well, so at first, well, one of the important things about Psyche is not just her physical beauty, but she's also just a truly lovely person.
Mm,
She doesn't have any ego. She doesn't make a big deal out of her beauty. She's a lovely person to be around. She's always kind to others. And so it's like she has everything. She's the total package. And Orwell loves her. And as she tells the story, she loves her because of her beauty and because of her kindness and all of that. And but the some of the people of the village get the idea that if they can just touch her, maybe their offspring will also be beautiful.
mm,
And then the whole village gets this idea, and they come rushing out and make a whole day of kind of forcing her to be there, to touch them and to say kind words over them so that they might be healed. But there's a plague that comes through the village, and she doesn't heal these people of the plague, and so they blame her for the
Mm.
if my recollection is correct, they blame her for the plague.
Yeah.
And at that point, then she becomes a scapegoat for the village, that until she is sacrificed, then the village will not be healed. It's not, in fact, it's not just the plague, but it stops raining. I think they don't have enough rain.
Mm.
The
Mm.
crops are failing. One thing after another goes wrong, and they put all the blame on Psyche.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting because at first I thought maybe she was picked out more randomly, like it was more a superstitious thing, but now I see the clear the clear causation. And I mean, to Oriole, this is the end of the world because she is the most important person in her life. And so when she's held captive as well, and Oriole wants to speak to her, um, Oriole's more devastated about it than Psyche is, which is also another testament to the character of Psyche. Like it's such a beautiful person to her. And I will get back to the veil thing. It's just we have to build up the the story before we get there because can't go too fast. But so basically, she gets scapegoated, and it's not a public execution that she goes through. She's actually brought to, I think it's the mountain, right? With
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and as the legend goes, at the mountain there is a shadowy figure, sort of a monster. They call him the Shadow Brute, I believe. And she's brought there, and she is, I think, tied to a tree of some
Mm-hmm.
sorts. And the idea is basically that she will die, but they're just going to leave her there for dead. And I mean, I think any any other person would have probably died there, but she's left, and the king leaves. And Oriole, I think, now wants to go see her.
Well, she wants to go up and bury
Ah,
the
yeah, she
remains,
wants to see
right?
whatever remains. Yeah,
So
and
she enlists the captain of the guard to go with her. Well, the captain of the guard doesn't want her to go on her own because it's a very dangerous
mhm.
trip, and Orwell doesn't know the way, and so the captain of the guard, Bardia, accompanies her on this very treacherous journey
Mm.
to go and bury her sister.
Yeah, and Bardia is going to turn out to be an important character in the story, quite an admirable man, I would say. And Oriole grows very fond of him as well, and she can trust and rely on him. And basically, they go to the mountain, and I think Bardia stays behind as they go near because I think he feels that he's not of that divine category of the royal blood, or however you would conceptualize it. And she goes there, and Psyche actually is still present. And not only is she present, she seems to be glowing, radiating, like she's transformed in a way. And that's of course a big surprise to Oriole. And she tries to get an explanation out of Psyche. And Psyche says that she was saved by a god. So then who is this god? How does this happen, and what is the experience of a god? Because Oriole still, she has this complaint of the gods, of course. So this is I think where things start to go even more south for her. Her jealousy grows even stronger because she actually fears that this god might not be a god at all, might be more of a monster like the shadow brute we described. And Psyche leads her to the kingdom that she was brought to by this god, but Oriole cannot see the kingdom. And this is something Lewis, it's his own spin on the story. I think in the original myth of Cupid and Psyche
Mm-hmm.
there's not this element, but he makes it so. And I think it's really a beautiful contrast between, let's say, a believer and an unbeliever, where she doesn't see anything, and Psyche is completely immersed in it, and she speaks as if she had just gone through a mystical experience, and she's still going through it, like completely transformed. And basically, Oriole doesn't trust it, A, and B, she feels that Psyche is being stolen from her by the god. And that's, I think, a very important part of the story, because this is where she feels betrayed. She really is angry with the gods, and she basically blackmails um, Psyche by.
Well, don't jump too far because
Okay, okay, go ahead.
that's the second time she goes to the mountain.
Oh, okay, okay, good. This is why
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have you.
yeah,
I'm telling you. Okay,
yeah.
so.
But I think this whole idea is so important about not being able to see the castle that Psyche is living in. And yes, I think it is a picture of spiritual reality,
Mm,
but I also somebody pointed me back this morning to the very first episode I ever did on this channel and said, you have to go back and re-listen to that episode. So I went back and re-listened to it. And there was a very interesting idea on there that I had completely forgotten about. And that is this idea that, you know, John Vervaeke is always talking about relevance realization.
mm,
And when I first started the channel, I wasn't aware of him or relevance realization or anything like that. But I had my own concept of something I called experiential DNA, which basically it differs from relevance realization, but they're connected. So experiential DNA would be like you're a unique individual, I'm a unique individual. We both have unique physical DNA, but we have also had completely unique experiences from each other. And so things will be relevant to you that are not relevant to me, just because of maybe conversations that you've had in the past or books that you've read or the way that you were raised, your family of origin, the friends that you've had. So you see the world through a completely different filter than I do. And each of us has this thing in us that seems to me almost like it has little attachments on it that catch things as they come through the world, and we take them in, and then that builds us even more and builds us more and more inside so that we become the people that we are. Well, so this is a little bit of a long idea, but um, as I was listening to that video, I was talking on the video about how there can be a word that means something to a child, but it means a very simple thing to a child. And that word has a completely different meaning to an adult. Or it might have a different meaning to you than it has to me, just because our capacity is different for the way that we hear things. Um, and I read this quote from Michelangelo on that video, and I had completely forgotten this quote, but Michelangelo said, not even the best of artists has any conception that a single marble block does not contain within its excess, and that is only attained by the hand that obeys the intellect.
mm.
So if you think about the marble block as containing every conceivable work of art that any human being could ever come up with, then the hand that obeys the intellect has the capacity to bring something out of that marble block by utilizing what might be excess to somebody else, but is essential to me if I'm carving that thing, if I could carve. So the excess and the essential are different for each person. And I think that it ties into this thing that Orwell was incapable of seeing that palace because of who she was inside.
Yeah.
And that would be true whether it's a spiritual reality or even things in the physical world that we don't even notice, but that somebody else, for them, it's just shining, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm reminded of people that are, let's say, um, that they work in nature or they work on the beach. Like as a child, for example, I would always look down on nature people, or people that would like look at birds or whatever, and it would just be like, what is there to see here? So I think that's a similar thing where there can be a paradise
So
right
what do you
here.
see? What do you see now when you look at a bird, Lucas?
Oh, everything. I love. Like for me, I don't need to go far just to experience paradise. I've learned that even my close surroundings here, the little bit of green that I have in my surroundings, has so much variety and so much depth. And I see how the seasons change, that I could never even get bored of a kilometer or of a mile just here.
Mhm.
So I don't need to see, like, I don't need to travel the world to experience the beauty of nature, let's say. But I still like to see the things, of course. But yeah, that definitely shifted, and I think
Yeah.
it's that same shift that we hope to see in others and hope to see in the book as well.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that this thing about the block of marble also relates to each person's life. So maybe at the beginning of my life or at the beginning of your life, we were like a block of marble. So that anything would be conceivable, would be potential. But every choice that we make over time tilts the lever a little one direction or
Yeah,
another and prevents us from seeing some things, or we close our eyes to them, or we don't pay attention in quite the way that we could.
yeah,
And so we miss things, and then they don't become a part of who we are. And I think that's part of what was happening with Orwell. It's not only that sometimes she had a veil over her face that kept others from seeing her, but she had a veil over her face that kept her from seeing what she might otherwise have seen.
oh yeah, for sure. That's why she goes veiled for so long at some point. Because if we continue on the story, well, actually, why don't you fill in the gaps here? Because I'm not sure what happens between the first visit and the second.
Yeah,
If
I
you
don't
do.
quite remember that either, but well, I think it might be that what happens between the first and second visit is that um, a whole lot of things happen actually. Bardia decides to train her as a warrior.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
And then about the same time, her father dies, the king dies, and she has to take over as queen because he dies without a son.
Mm.
And somehow there's no other male um, relative or something that can
Yeah.
take over. And so she takes over as queen. So to me, one of the really interesting things about this book is like I was telling you before we started, there's two stories. There's the whole first book, which is the story told through her lens about her life. And if you just read that book and you didn't read the second book, the story that you'd basically get is here's a person who overcame tremendous handicaps
Mm-hmm.
in being um, abused emotionally by her father and being considered hideous by people and rejected by people all around her, and having to take on a lot of responsibilities as a young child because her mother dies when Psyche is born. And she has all these handicaps against her, and she's a woman, which in that time was a great handicap. Um, but she learns to be a warrior. When she has to take over the queenship, she learns to be a good queen, and her people consider her to be a good queen, and she brings things into the kingdom that help people to thrive. And you see all of that play
Yeah.
itself out in the world. That's the story, and that's the story she's telling about herself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear that story, it sounds perfectly reasonable and kind of heroic. And even though she has all these issues about, you know, she has resentments towards the gods and things like that, you could look at it as the story of this great heroic queen.
Yeah. No, for sure. And
Yeah,
this is while she is veiled also as well, which I
yeah.
think the veil is almost, to me, it's almost a freeze on the actual story that matters to me. Because from the moment she gets veiled, this is where the story goes, like, oh, she's a queen, she's did all these amazing things, but you feel that inside nothing has changed, and nothing is changing in this time. So her accomplishments also, she speaks about them like she did them, but she doesn't take a lot of pride in them. She's not really there for them, really.
Mm-hmm.
So even though, yes, it's a story, and it can be inspiring, or it can be like accomplishments and all these things, but it's not to her. She's still stuck. And that's a
Yeah.
mind state, I feel.
And
Um,
at the same time, she has become very dependent on the friendship of Bardia, who taught her these warrior ways, and they often fight battles together, and then they often solve problems together, and she begins to love him, but it's
mhm.
that love that cannot be requited because he's very happily married, has 8 children, loves his wife immensely, and that all has a part to play in the later part of the book. But um, yeah, I mean, it's all, to me, it's all very realistic. If you can get
Yeah.
past the thought that this is happening in some pagan kingdom
Hmm,
2000
hmm.
years ago, it's really very realistic in the way that
Almost
it
certainly.
explores the human thought and human emotion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people love like this. They love
Mhm.
in a way that is consumptive and in a way that is not agapic, let's say. Like they wouldn't be able to let it go.
Mhm.
They're so, let's say, attached, and that's what she is. And I think, yeah, all these things that she's doing, it means almost nothing to her because she doesn't have Psyche and she doesn't have Bardia. So it's almost a repetition of what happened. Um,
Well,
yeah,
and I think that's a key point. She sees the world through the lens of what she doesn't have.
exactly.
She doesn't have beauty, she doesn't have Psyche, she doesn't have Bardia, she doesn't have a husband. She sees the whole world through the lens of what she doesn't have.
Mm.
And don't we all do that? You know?
Often,
Yeah.
yeah, I
So
guess so.
so then she goes to the mountain a second time for some reason. Oh, she gets kind of obsessed with this idea that Psyche is not actually being cared for by a god, but
Yeah.
that it might be some human hunter or somebody who was out in the woods who is actually sexually abusing her and taking advantage of her. And so she feels like she has to go back and convince her to get away from this guy. Um, and the strange part of it, when I first read it, I thought this is kind of weird and icky because this god that has her in this castle will not show himself to her.
Mm.
So when they love each other in the night, she can't see his face. She can't see who he is. And I thought that was a little strange, but that comes into the story because when Orwell goes back to the mountain, she kind of blackmails Psyche into um, trying to force him to see his face. And Psyche says, no, I can't do that because he made me promise that I would never put pressure on him to see his face. But Orwell injures herself in a particularly brutal way and says, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to kill myself and I'm going to show you that I can kill myself. And so she stabs herself through the arm and bleeds everywhere as a way of proving how firm she is about this. And Psyche, because Psyche loves Orwell, she says, okay, I will shine the light on him at night. And then that, of course, has the result of him um, going away, disappearing, whatever. And then she's left, the castle, everything goes away. So she's left to the elements.
And then this is where she later turns to, um, I guess, a deity, or at least in the conception of where,
Well,
because
later on, so we don't find that out. I mean, we know that she has, the story moves on from there. And
Mhm.
it isn't until later in Orwell's queenship that she becomes kind of weary of her life as a queen and she decides,
Mhm.
I need to get out and see the world,
Yeah.
which is kind of funny. Like, oh, I think I'll take a trip to Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly.
But in that world, going out and seeing the world meant getting all of your servants and and helpers together to carry the luggage and everything to just go on a trip for a few weeks, maybe 15 miles away from home. But for her, that was something she'd never seen. And one of the things she comes upon is this little temple or little sanctuary place where, and this is many, many years later, where they are
Yeah.
worshiping Psyche.
Mm.
Um, but they tell a different story of Psyche she had than what she had written in the book.
Yeah, and it's a story that angers her very much because there it's a different account than what we get in the novel itself. I
Yeah,
think
and
it
it
says
makes
that,
her look bad.
yeah, it makes her look really, 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 really bad. And I think it's also mentioned, I'm not sure, but I think it's mentioned that she does see the kingdom. Is that so? Do you remember this? That she is able to
Well,
see?
yes, it said that she was able to see it.
Mm,
And there actually was a point early on where she kind of saw something and then she kind of talked herself out of seeing it.
yeah.
And so, it the story that's told in the temple may very well be true that she had seen it, but she refused to acknowledge that she had seen it.
Ah, that's an interesting, yeah, that's a really good
Yeah.
perspective actually, because it makes more sense of let's say, the power of her attachment
Hmm.
to pull her out of that, to pull her out of being
Yeah.
able to see it. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then out of her anger over that whole thing, she decides to just kind of take on the gods. She's gonna go and have her complaint against the gods because she feels like she's been so mistreated in all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, she writes. I think she writes the complaint in elaborate words, and it takes her a long time. And I think that it's also worth mentioning the fox. I think we haven't even mentioned him at all. Fox is an important figure in the story. He's a Greek slave who comes into the kingdom when Oriole is a young girl, and he's he's a learned man from Greece, so he knows the philosophy, and he's very much responsible for Oriole's worldview as well. So I think I would describe him maybe as more a bit of a rationalist, maybe
Mm-hmm.
rationalist philosopher. He has a very particular understanding of the gods, let's say. Um, so not exactly a believer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also why she's able to write this complaint like this, because she was taught it so well, and she has quite an intellectual understanding of all of this, and then she comes out with this complaint, and and it's her life's work. And then I think this is where we jump to the last part, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where the one you've read many times, so I'd love to let you describe it because you're probably better at that than I am.
Well, the last part that was the first time I read it was very confusing to me and very troubling to me. And today it made more sense, but I sort of just let it wash over me in a way. So
Mm,
it's not exactly that it tells a story, as that it she has a shift in mindset. She has a shift in perspective that takes place partly because Bardia becomes ill. And at first, she's very resentful that he's not there to help her. Um, and she goes through some kind of illness herself. And when she wakes up from that illness, she finds out that Bardia may be very close to death. And so she's terribly upset about that and wonders why she couldn't have gone to see him. And the local temple priest says, well, if you had done that, that would have only made it worse because he would have tried to get out of his sickbed to do whatever you needed because, he was always wanted to be there for you. And so then she's not even able to see him and he dies. And so she goes to see his widow to offer condolences. And the widow says, don't you realize that it's everything that you put him through that emptied him out to the place where he had no strength to overcome this illness? And Oral is kind of like, what are you talking about? Well, because he was determined to be the best soldier and the best counselor that he could be for you, so that when he came home at night, he was completely exhausted and wiped out and had nothing left for me or the children. And in fact, he would be so tired he couldn't even eat, but he would get up early in the morning the next morning. And all of a sudden, Orwell saw the world through a completely different lens. Like, but I loved him, but did I do that to him? I thought I loved him, but then I did that to him. And could that have been what I was doing in all of these other places where I thought I loved somebody and then I was actually using them for my own purposes? And um, that creates this whole mind shift. And then she goes through this series of very strange dreams. Do you remember the dreams? There's there's
Well,
there's one that I really want somebody to explain to me, where the king, her father, comes back to her and takes her to the pillar room, which is the room where they make all the
yeah,
decisions. And he takes her over to the corner, and there are two pickaxes and a shovel. And he makes her work with him to dig a hole in the center of the pillar room. And then he grabs hold of her, and they fall through the hole. And then they land on their feet, many feet down, and then they're in another room. But this whole room is exactly like the pillar room, but this one's made of earth. And then he finds some more tools in that room and makes her dig with him. And they dig that one out, and they get down into a lower place that's very small, and but the same kind of a pillar room. And in that room, he reveals to her, well, I think he shows her the mirror. And when she looks in that mirror, she realizes that she is Ungat. She is
mm,
this ugly old crone god that people were worshiping, this old stone
yeah.
goddess. And she gets this idea, well, I am that ugly old thing. And I just don't get that dream. I mean, what is this all about? Digging the hole and going into another room, and then digging the hole and going into another room. I mean, is it like
Uh,
it's going down into her psyche, or
I think it's definitely digging down to the depths. It's interesting. Also, part of this dream is that as soon as she sees the king, she has to take her veil off. He's like, "Take it off. You know, this is silly." While she was wearing the veil, she was queen, and in a way, it was to hide what was underneath. Um, but as soon as the king is back, she turns back into Oriole. So she's no longer the queen; she's Oriole again.
mm,
And as Oriole, she starts digging down and down. I think it may have something to do, like you say, with digging into herself, going to the very foundations, and then finally coming down and seeing what she has turned into. She has
mm.
turned into the very gods that she hates, the traits, the jealousy, the consumptive love. But I'm sure that there's more to be said about the digging in particular. I sadly do not have the Jonathan Pajot symbolism eyes
Yeah.
to see this. He would probably be able to tell you.
Has he done an episode on this book?
I don't think so. I
Oh,
looked up like in YouTube until we
I'm,
have
I'm
face. I did
waiting for
see anything
that one.
pop up. Yeah, we should get that because he's recently, like I said, spoken about the trilogy, the Ransom trilogy. So maybe, maybe I'd hope
Yeah.
so. I really wonder what kind of insights he has because you just know he has like a ton more than anyone else.
Well, and then she has one more dream where she's in, um, well, it may be a dream, may not be a dream.
Yeah.
She's speaking before the gods, and she has this book that she's written with all of her accusations against the gods, which she's going to read to them. But when she starts reading it, she realizes she's not reading the book that she wrote. She's saying other things that she sort of feels compelled to say. And those things are revealing this inner darkness and this inner envy and resentment and bitterness and jealousy that she'd had all these years, and how the consequences of that had affected all the people in her life. And then the fox, who died long before, is also in this place or in this dream, and takes her over to see this almost like movie screens, a room that has these walls with paintings on it, and then the paintings begin to move. And Psyche is in this picture, moving picture. And somehow she gets the idea from watching these pictures of Psyche that Psyche had taken on some of the Psyche had paid for some of Orwell's sins, but then Orwell was paying for, I don't know, it's very confusing. maybe I can find a quote from there that would make more sense of it. But do you remember that vision that she had?
Those visions, yeah, I think she's shown basically how she was so possessive of Psyche. She is she is shown exactly what she did wrong. She's shown all her sins. And the same, I think, with her reading out her complaint, um, exactly because it's not what she thinks she wrote down. And also in a different voice, almost she speaks it like she hears herself talking. She finally gets the outside perspective of like, hey, this is actually what I've become. And I think this is the first time she's been in that perspective for so long, and now she takes the shift and she's able to see everything she did wrong, and the flashbacks I think greatly attribute to that, because this is where she sees the situation between her and Psyche as well. And Psyche is the person she cared about most, and to see that she hurt her, I think that takes the biggest toll on her, and I think it teaches her the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and at the very end, she's taken there's this place where maybe I'll just read a little bit.
Go ahead.
If Psyche had not held me by the hand, I should have sunk down. She had brought me now to the very edge of the pool. The air was growing brighter and brighter around us, as if something had set it on fire. Each breath I drew let me into new terror, joy, overpowering sweetness. I was pierced through and through with the arrows of it. I was being unmade. I was no one. But that's little to say. Rather, Psyche herself was in a manner no one. I loved her as I would once have thought it impossible to love, would have died any death for her, and yet it was not now she that really counted. Or if she counted, and oh, gloriously she did, it was for another's sake. The earth and stars and sun, all that was or will be, existed for his sake. And he was coming, the most dreadful, the most beautiful, the only dread and beauty there is was coming. The pillars on the far side of the pool flushed with his approach. I cast down my eyes. Two figures, reflections, their feet to Psyche's feet and mine, stood head downwards in the water. But whose were they? Two Psyches, the one clothed, the other naked? Yes, both Psyches, both beautiful, if that mattered now, beyond all imagining, yet not exactly the same. You also are Psyche, came a great voice. I looked up then, and it's strange that I dared. So from her father, she gets the message, you also are Ungit. And now here from this vision she's having with Psyche and this other most dreadful, most beautiful he, you also are Psyche. But I saw no god, no pillared court. I was in the palace gardens, my foolish book in my hand. The vision to the eye, I think, faded one moment before the oracle to the ear. That was 4 days ago. They found me lying on the grass. So, and at this point, they take her back into the queen's bedroom, and then that's pretty much the end of the book. She dies at that, just about at that moment. But that's her last vision. She gets this picture that she was Ungit, there was a part of her that was Ungit, but then also she is Psyche. And I think I have some puzzlement about that.
Okay,
So
there's a lot
what
to.
did you make of that?
Well, one thing I want to add also is that after she's read out her complaint, she doesn't get a response, but she doesn't need to, because just by virtue of her listening to herself, she's like,
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I don't need an answer from the gods. That would just be more
Mm-hmm.
words, combating with words. So she's at peace with that. But what I like about the ending, what you mentioned, Psyche and Angit, I feel that it's almost mercy and judgment, let's say. She gets fully judged by becoming Angit, and Angit in this case is this jealous goddess. But Psyche, on the other hand, I think symbolizes the good in a sense, beauty as well. And so, even though, yes, Oriole, you were wrong, you were definitely possessing these people in a way that you should not possess people that you love. You're also Psyche, so you're also forgiven. That's how I see it, kind of, and that's I guess that's Christ symbolized, that you get
Mm-hmm.
both of those. But for me, the mercy is the strongest because we're mortals and we're all going to be sinning for sure.
Well, right. And I guess what I also saw just as you were talking is that Psyche gave herself to him and was loved by him
Yeah,
and dwelt with him. And now um Orwell is also as Psyche. She is loved by him. She has seen her own need of him, she has seen her own sin, and she is loved by him, and she will dwell with him
yeah.
forever. I think,
Only after she has seen her own sin.
yeah, yeah,
That's necessary for redemption,
yeah,
salvation.
yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah.
Especially the
Wow.
passage you just read was like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a book. And I think one of the things that makes it so powerful, I mean, we're just telling the story right now, so
Yeah,
you can't get the feeling of it at all. But when you're in the book, you are there. You are in that environment, and it awakens all of your sensory perception to what that world must have been like, and you get to know the people so well that you almost feel like you could, once you're not reading the book anymore, you could call them up or send them an email or something and ask them a
yeah,
question,
yeah.
right? Because people are so real.
No, absolutely. I think that's what I I emailed you when I was halfway, I think. And I was like, I don't read fiction a lot, but this is some of the realest stuff. Like this is I'm there. It's so vivid,
Mm-hmm.
for better and for worse, because you get to get the bleakness of the situation, but you also get that infinite beauty that you get toward the end. That's why I would really, anyone that listens to this, I would really recommend, please read this book. It's not that long, and it's one to read again and again. So definitely worth getting.
Yeah, and I also think it's one that you can actually listen to.
Yeah.
There's a very good in fact, I'll put this in the description. There's a guy that does a reading of it, chapter by chapter, on his YouTube channel. So,
Mm.
I mean, you can only get a chapter at a time, but then you just click to the next one in his series. And he does an excellent job, really excellent job. And listening to it in some ways makes it even more real
Yeah.
because he dramatizes it in a very powerful way. So I think you can get it both ways. And I listened to it and then I read it. And even then there's a lot of depth there. So
Yeah, for sure. I think we got to unleash Jonathan Pageau on this, because even when I'm reading anything, I'm obviously missing a lot of it. But then there's also the interpretation that I'm missing,
mhm.
and the insight and the depth and the knowledge of Lewis and the knowledge of the original myth and all these things. I'd be very, very curious to hear brighter minds. Um,
Yeah, I would be
it
interested in
is.
understanding, is there, okay, did Lewis pick that myth to write about just because he had that insight about how the palace should have been invisible. Because in the original myth, there's the three sisters, and two of them are just jealous of Psyche, and that's why they sabotage her because of their
Mm.
jealousy. So that would make it more like Cinderella, right?
Yeah.
The two jealous sisters, and it would make it more like Cinderella or something like that. Um, but Lewis kind of turned it around, and instead of Orwell being jealous of Psyche, the way Orwell tells the story, at least, she was jealous of the god because the god had stolen Psyche away from her.
Yeah.
But was she really jealous of Psyche? I mean, maybe that's the story that you get in the second book, is that she really was jealous of all that Psyche had, but she just couldn't see that that's what was driving her.
I think that's possible. And I think, again, it reflects Lewis himself. I think one of the reasons he wanted to write this story, and initially he wanted to write it from uh, what is now Oriel's perspective, is because he identified with that. So he was angry at the gods, I think, at first, but maybe he didn't realize that his anger or envy of the gods was actually an anger or envy of being that good. Because he only got to that goodness, I think, when he accepted it. When he accepted, let's say, that love, and when he started loving himself in that way. Of course, I'm not a Lewis scholar, but I can imagine that this is how it went, because I personally feel that I experienced it this way um, in my life. That once you transform within, that you can seek properly. And I really do believe that you can then see the truth before you are blinded by your ignorance and jealousy, because I do think those are things that will blind you.
Well, I mean, let's go back to the block of marble there. That the work of art is in, for Michelangelo, the work of art consisted of chipping away the excess. And is that how God is working in our lives? Is in um, chipping away the excess of all this garbage that we carry around,
Mm.
right? And chipping that away so that the real person that we are can come forward and recognize him and um, dwell in his palace. You know.
Oh yeah, I think I think so. I remember an image of I don't have the marble stone, but of the idea of dead wood. Did you carry dead wood with you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that going to hell is like you're burning off the dead wood, and if you're 99% that, then you're you're in trouble. But that you need those flaming swords of judgment to get rid of it. Um, so not exactly the same image, but I think it works in the same way. Is that is exactly what we are uh, made to do. I think that's what judgment eventually is, and it's happening in real time. I feel. I think there's a want to get there, but if you don't aim at it yourself, it's not going to happen, and you're just gonna gather more of that excess, as you say. I think that that's not going to
Well,
stop.
one of the marriage teachings that I heard years ago was that um, we tend to end up with a partner that exemplifies for us the sandpaper principle, because our partner rubs off all our rough places and we rub off all their rough places. But sandpaper is not very pleasant. It can be painful at times.
Yeah.
Um, but but it's in dwelling in close proximity with another person that we find out how selfish we are, and all of those things that Orwell never had to learn, basically, because she was by herself. She
Yeah.
she she could be her own, um, she could be her own person, You know how Peterson always says that we offload our sanity by being in relationship with other people. But
Yeah,
Orwell never really let herself be in relationship with other people because she thought she was so hideous, and she thought that no man would ever love her, um and so she never really let herself be in close relationship with anybody who could have called her to account. Now she was in a close relationship with Bardia, but she was the queen and he was her servant. And so he's not going to hold her to account. He's not going to have any opportunity to rub off
yeah,
the rough places, right?
yeah. That's good actually. I never thought about it. Like the hierarchy impedes him from doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
I like this principle. Like you have to love yourself before you should love another, because it's only when you love yourself that you can love another truly.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, it turns into exactly what it turned into with Oriole. I would say.
Well, yeah, I mean, when Christ says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you,"
Mm,
if you don't know how you would have them do unto you, how do you know how to do unto them anything? If you don't know what would be the good for you, then how do you know how to
exactly.
be the good for another,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you haven't figured out who you are, and if you haven't learned to love yourself, then you don't have any framework to know how to love another person.
Yeah. That's pretty beautiful. Do you think that someone has to fully love themselves before they can enter into a relationship, or do you think it can also be learned within the relationship?
We better be able to learn it within a relationship, because it's a long road to get to on all of those scores, I think.
Mm,
Because I think, especially if you start out too early loving yourself, you can love yourself in a very unhealthy way. That
yeah.
um, in a tiny way, that may be the story of Redival. We haven't talked too much about Redival.
Yeah.
Um, the middle sister, Redival, was also kind of pretty, but very vain and flighty. And so Orwell really resented her and looked down on her throughout her whole life, and was completely irritated by her for most of it. And it isn't until very, very late in the story. Well, so Redival kind of when she's young, she has a fling with one of the courtiers whose name was Taran. And when the king finds out about it, he's furious because royal blood cannot mix with non-royal blood. And so he has Taran castrated. And
That's rough.
Taran ends up leaving the kingdom. And then years later, this this very rich eunuch who is a servant to a much bigger kingdom than her kingdom comes to visit and is negotiating on behalf of his king with Orwell. And she's looking at this guy, and he's enormously fat and all fancied up in all kinds of fancy clothes, as eunuchs were, I guess, in those days. And she sees something in him that's kind of familiar, and she says, "Are you Taran?" And he laughs and he says, "Oh, yes." He says, "How's your sister doing?" He says, "That was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I never would have become as famous and as wealthy as I am now if that hadn't happened to me."
Mm,
But then he tells Orwell, he says, um, the reason Redival came to me was that she was so lonely. And Orwell says, "What do you mean?" "Well, first the fox came and you spent all your time with the fox and you didn't spend time with Redival anymore. And then Psyche was born, and then you were all in love with Psyche, and then Redival was nobody to you. But Redival just felt so alone and lonely. And so that's why she ended up the way she was." And all of a sudden, like the scales fall off of Orwell's eyes. Did I do that? did I do that to Redeval? And then she realizes that indeed she was all about herself. She wasn't at all concerned about taking care of her younger sister. And as a result, Redeval ended up being a very vain and fussy and kind of broken person.
Yeah, I think this is another one of those examples of the perspective change. I mean, Redeval was signed off from the start of the story. I feel like
Yeah.
it's like you don't have to pay attention to her. She's just this
Uh-huh.
vain, terrible person.
Yeah.
But to think
Yeah.
that Oriole kind of made her like that, I think is so powerful.
Yeah. And so then you never get a picture of what she could have been, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sad. I think it's something to think about in our own lives. I think I definitely had this with like when I grew up, I had my own friends, and I told you about my life where I um, let go of a lot of friends because I felt that I really need the time to develop on my own. And I've had a lot of dreams, like a lot of dreams over the years of those friends being like very angry with me and accusing me, let's say. Now, looking back on it, I think this is not how they actually feel. And I've spoken to some of them, but it's at least true in principle that if you think you are better than other people and you can go on your own, you actually might be limiting their potential because you know you could be also a force for good instead of just saying no to them. You could be saying yes or yes you could. Um, and in this society, we have so much opportunity to pick and choose people, pick and choose relationships, pick and choose friends, pick and choose almost anyone at this point, that we almost forget that by nature human beings are much more community oriented, and the community and the family is what you're usually born in. So that's what you got. The church closest to you is what you got. You can't just go to another city if you don't have a car or whatever. And maybe that's part of our duty. And it's not to say that I think it's necessarily wrong to sometimes let go of people, but I do think there is often a lot more there than you might think, because a lot of that is up to you. So that's something I should tell myself sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean that even if you do by virtue of circumstance have to move away from some people, it's still a good thing to go back and keep in touch and
Mm,
remind people that they have value in your life, right?
yeah,
But it does become a challenge as you get older and you have a broader and broader friendscape, sort of. How do you manage so many friendships? And maybe that's, I forget which one of is it Brett Weinstein, or one of these guys is always talking about how you can only manage a community of 150 people. Beyond
it's the
that,
Dunbar number, I believe.
is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, that's what it called.
Yeah, beyond that, you can't really manage. And I certainly understand that because I've lived in a lot of different places over my life, many different states and countries, and developed friendships in all of them. And I've been to a lot of different churches
Yeah,
and schools and all of those things. And at a certain point, I can remember times in my life when I just felt inundated with people. Like I can't handle one more friendship. Now,
yeah,
that sounds weird because now that I'm older and I live in California, everybody's moved away. So I had this group of like 10 women friends that we would meet once a month, and we had great fellowship and all of that. And now in the last 3 years, all of them, every single one has moved to another state.
well,
And so,
yeah.
where 10 years ago I would have been saying, I can't handle any more friends. I'm like, now, will you be my friend?
Yeah,
So, I mean, you
well,
have to be careful what you ask for, right?
no, for sure. But I mean, also just think about it. Like, how many people, historically speaking, would have been able to do what you did in your lifetime? Moved all these different places. Like,
Oh, yeah. I mean, do people even realize that this 150-year chunk of time that that comes up to this chunk of time, there's been no time in the history of the universe that's like this last 150 years.
Exactly.
Where up until 150 years ago, almost everybody was so poor they couldn't move beyond their own village.
Mm.
And 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 then in 150 years we get trains and planes and automobiles and
Yeah,
computers and cell phones and um, things that no one could have ever conceived of prior to 1800 or 1850. And I mean, it's just so weird that in the whole history of the world, and that we should have ended up getting born into this particular time period. It just seems very weird to me.
it is very strange. And the technology may grow exponentially, but we don't. We're still human beings. We're
Yeah.
the same human beings we were 1,000 years ago, and that's why I think we're not built for this life in many ways. So acting according to our nature is probably going to help. That's why I think a lot of people are seeing the value in community now and the value in face-to-face interaction. And and yeah, just think about cell phones. And for example, my girlfriend, she has trouble sometimes keeping in touch with people over the cell phones because they're kind of there, but they're not really there. I mean, they're within our access, like a couple of taps, and you can like send a text message to them, but it's just not the same. And like you said, with the 150, that is really a limit. And so, yeah, I don't think we are built for this. So I try to keep things as human as possible. For example, I try not to even send as many texts. I just like send the voice memo or call people, which some people find annoying, but I think it's better in many ways. It's like, who still calls? And I'm like, I'd love to call. It's much easier.
I do think we need to get back to that. I have some friends that like to talk about deep things, but they like to do it over text. Well,
Not
so
for me.
having these really deep conversations on text is very difficult because
Yeah.
you're trying to answer deep questions and whether you're doing it with voiceover or thumbs or fingers or whatever on a phone, it's like ridiculous. Um, and and when you talk to somebody, you can hear their voice and you can kind of tell how's this going down. Are we still in relationship here? Because you can say things that at least I mean, when I was growing up, that's the only way we had of communicating with each other. And our phones had cords on them. So you had to stay in the same room with your phone while you were talking. And but it was a sort of a meme that when you're in high school, you spend your whole evening on the phone talking with friends,
Oh
and
yeah.
parents would be so frustrated. You're just on the phone for 2 or 3 hours with different friends. Um, but at least you were connected to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And now so many people are alone, and the only connections are very superficial, if at all, if they're there at all.
Do
So I
you see
think
that in your country as well, or is that just an American phenomenon?
no, it's here for sure. I mean, video games don't know borders. They take people. Um, my country, I find it sometimes hard to assess because I'm in contact with quite a lot of people, and I don't know a lot of like deep gamers and stuff, because the people I do know are either from the gym or from a university, or like people that do a lot of in-person stuff. But I have worked with teenagers trying to tutor them, and I've seen a big shift in the way they behave and their social capabilities and the way they dress, even like they come into in like their sports stuff, and like you know it's just the bar has definitely been lowered. So I feel a tremendous sense of responsibility in lifting it up, because I am of this generation, and I think I um, can definitely help with that. But usually the US is a bit different than Europe, but it's very similar in broad terms.
Well, so when you go to church, how does the pastor dress?
Depends on which church. So I've been to Catholic church and Orthodox church in my area, And I've actually been it's another conversation, but I've been struggling a lot with finding what's right. But all that said, in Orthodox Church, they're dressed.
Yeah, well, they have the
At Catholic Church, it's they have like a specific garb for sure, and like
mhm.
certain colors depending on the um, let's say on the theme, or I don't know how it works. I think they have like specific. Like I'm not learned at all, so please don't judge me about this. But I haven't been to Protestant church, but I think my family when they go, they also still wear this garb. I don't know how it is for you.
Well, the funny thing I've noticed is that so I became a Christian in 1980, and back then the pastor used to wear a suit and tie and
Oh,
in a Protestant church, yeah.
yeah, we
So,
don't get that here.
but now and over the years, it's just gotten more and more and more. Then for many years, up until the last few years, it was at least a button-down shirt and a pair of dress pants. And now it's a sweatshirt and blue jeans. And
Really?
they're trying to be relevant, I think.
Yeah, that's
They're
interesting.
not trying not to scare people away or something, but I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
No, as I've experienced it growing up, we've always had the person, like the pastor up front, wearing something specific, like a garb, a white, usually a white toga or something,
Yeah.
something like that.
No, not in the Protestant churches these days.
That's interesting.
Yep.
How are you finding it there? Because I struggle a lot. Like I said, I struggle a lot with finding a right place. And coming back to what I said before, maybe that's not the right way to look at it. But I can imagine that because you have so much, let's say, having a Dutch word in my mind, you have so much exposure um, to like orthodoxy and to all these other, like even Verveke with all his things and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, do you struggle with your church or no? I mean, of course,
Well,
that's
I mean,
always.
I'm super thankful that the church we're in is has really solid, very good teaching,
Hmm.
and and it focuses a lot on community, real big, strong focus on community. So there are a lot of home groups, and the home groups meet either once a week or every other week. Our home group meets every other week. We have a home group that meets here in our home that, given any particular week, we might have between 12 and 15 people. And that's a wonderful way to build community. And then the church also does all kinds of activities in the community to help um, the schools and the nonprofit organizations around, and um, reach out into the neighborhoods. And so there's a lot of community activity. And and then of course just the people helping with all the activities in the church, that creates communities too. So the hospitality committee and the Sunday school teachers and all of these things that are going on are building teams and community in the church. So all of that is really good. And I think the thing that I miss the most, and that's maybe because I'm older, I don't know. I miss there being more of a focus on what I guess in the Catholic and Orthodox churches you would call the liturgy, where there is a call and response, or where we're reading the scriptures and then responding to the scriptures. That used to be a part of church in the Protestant tradition for a long time. And as they've tried to get more and more relevant, that has sort of gone out the window.
Mm.
And then the music used to be at least a mix of hymns and contemporary music. Now it's just all this contemporary music that I hesitate to even call it music, because there's some sort of a trend nowadays to develop this kind of music that's more, do you know the term recitative? Um,
No, recitative.
Recitative, yeah. So it's a musical term that means you're you're sort of telling a story with the melody, but it's not, so it's not really a melody. You're
Okay, okay.
just sort of like, um, what do they call that? Stream of consciousness. It's sort of like stream
Oh,
of consciousness
okay.
singing. And then the singers have this tendency to try to be edgy, I guess, to not exactly hit the note, but to kind of waver around the note. So you're not,
Okay.
if you can't quite hear the instruments, you're not quite sure what the note is, and you don't know how to sing with it. And so maybe you just have to sit there and listen to them. And that's not the way music is supposed to be. From my perspective, growing up in the church was always we participate together in
Yeah.
the singing of worship music. And so that has been a challenge for me. And it is a challenge for me on another score, which I think is one of the purposes for the singing of worship music in the churches that I have been in since I became a Christian when I was 32. The purpose of the music was to kind of plant this biblical truth deep in your heart, because music helps you to remember it, and you have these hymns memorized because of the music. And so you're carrying these biblical truths around with you during the day and singing psalms and hymns and musical songs, like the scripture says. But this new music doesn't plant that way. It just doesn't, it's really hard to remember. It just kind of goes off into space
Hmm.
somewhere. And so I think we're missing that. And then there's these waves of what's in. So this year's music is different than last year's music and the music of the year before, where it used to always be that all the generations could gather together around the same music because we
Yeah.
all have this common memory of these songs. And when I was a missionary back in the 80s, I could go to Haiti and be in a Haitian church, and they would have some of their own songs, but they would also have some of the hymns, and we could sing
Yeah.
together. Or if I was in Japan, there would be some of those Japanese churches that would be singing some songs that we could all sing together because we had this common musicology that drew the church together. And I think with this new way of doing music, which I don't know where that comes from, is that everybody has to have their own creativity, or I mean, I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah. Oh, but that's a great point, though. I really like this idea of well, the music is there also to bind you together because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's religious, so that's the core function.
Yeah,
It's yeah, I find it pretty puzzling that's happened. But then again, there's a lot of things
a lot of things are very puzzling nowadays. Yeah, yeah.
so that's just a part of it. But yeah, it's I struggle so much personally being like, what's the right place? What's the right thing to do? And then I listen to Vervaeke and I'm trying to figure this out. What is a pathway forward? Because I'm trying to solve the meaning crisis as well.
Well,
And
I mean,
then,
what I think, isn't it, Jonathan? He always just says, find a church and go to it, you know,
yeah, but it's not what
and
he did.
but maybe the one you go to, it's kind of Jordan Peterson's thing, where you reach towards some high goal and you move towards that, and maybe that doesn't end up being the ultimate goal, but it gets you moving, and you're kind of moving in the right direction, and then
Yeah, yeah,
you end up having to veer off and do something else, but at least you are at, I guess I'm a little bit of a naive person, because I believe that within any church organization or any church denomination, there are believers and there are unbelievers. And so there are believers in all the different denominations. I know some denominations have the idea that theirs is the only way, and if you don't worship with them, you're not actually a believer. But I find that a little hard to swallow because
Yeah.
I've met people from some of these denominations that don't seem to be um, abiding in the word. But I've also met other people in those denominations that definitely are abiding in the word. And I've also met people in some of these lame Protestant churches that are making such terrible mistakes that are definitely very avid believers. And
Yeah, anywhere, I guess.
yeah, and so I think the point is to not forsake the assembling together of one another and to sing
Yeah.
and sing spiritual songs together and all the things that the Lord tells us to do, which we can't do if we're just being by ourselves. Because that ember dies if you just kick it off to the side of the fire, you know, but if all the
Yeah.
embers are brought together, then we make a flame together. So I think
Thank
it's
you.
important to find a church and plant yourself there. And if it doesn't end up being the ultimate place for you, you can move on, you know, and you'll learn something from it. You'll learn something
Yeah.
from the experience.
Thank you for your words. It's always
And
helpful
yeah,
to
and
get a
like I
different
say,
perspective.
a lot of people that will disagree with me. So
No, but of course that's otherwise I wouldn't listen because I want to hear as many different people with as many different perspectives as possible.
so tell
And
me
so,
about what you've been doing on your channel lately.
well, I've just been uploading once a week. That's how I work. I just like to do things consistently that are sustainable. So once a week is doable for me. So I started a podcast a couple of months ago, shortly after we did our first together, and it has been incredible for me to do. It's like, yeah, I feel like I found what I should be doing. You know, like finding my part to play that I spoke about before. Having conversations has been, yeah, life changing. I mean, in general, but then recording them is really fun to me because it allows me to train this and to reflect on the conversations and to most importantly share them. So that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to seek wisdom in this time. That's one of my core things that I'm trying to do. And so I speak to whoever I find interesting, and that is actually most people. That is the garbage man across the street, and that is some people from the little corner. I have some very interesting family members, surprisingly or unsurprisingly. And so I've just been doing that every week, and it's been, yeah, like I said, it's just been incredible. I feel like this is really something I'm made to do.
You do
So
have
yeah.
interesting family members. Yeah, your brother and your father are both very interesting. I don't know if you have other family members that you've had on your show, but
No, not yet. But they're my brother and my father are the most let's say talkative, and they like
Mhm.
the topics in the little corner.
Mhm.
And actually, fun thing, I don't know when do you think this is gonna upload? Because
Friday, Friday, 2 or 3 weeks from now, probably.
okay, because this weekend, well, it doesn't matter for now, but this weekend, my brother Aaron, he's speaking at a festival in Germany where Paul van der Klei will be. So that's like this little corner thing that's happening in Germany. So I would
Oh,
have said
your brother is speaking at that
Breakwater Festival, it's
Breakwater
called.
Festival. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been interviewing him, and actually, we're meeting tomorrow. I'm meeting Paul in Amsterdam, and then on Thursday they're coming to my city, so that will be fun. But
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. Yeah.
yeah, it does, it does. I'm sadly not going to actually be there in Germany. I'm in very busy times with university. Sadly, it's a it's a miracle I'm able to do this actually. But there's always time for books and for conversation, so that's awesome.
Yeah. So you get to show Paul around and
Yeah, I'll walk with them. I don't know what exactly the plan is, but yeah, hopefully you'll see a bit of the country. He was there last year as well, so that's that's fun. I hope he enjoyed
did you
himself.
meet up with him last year?
Last year I was in France while he was here,
Oh,
um,
okay.
so sadly no. But tomorrow is a good opportunity, so
Uh-huh.
it will be fun.
Cool. Very
So
cool.
that's what's been going on. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and I
exciting.
will let's put that in the description section, your channel. And yeah, if you have any other links that you want me to put in there, I will.
I think that's all good. Yeah, I have like my Spotify stuff. I'm actually speaking to John. next month, which is really exciting. John Favicki.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just shot him a little tweet and then he was like, "Sure, I'll do it." So I have a million questions for
Do
this
you
man,
have a
so that will be
topic
fun.
for him or?
Oh no, I've just like I very selfishly have a very big like log of questions that I have for him because I've listened to the meaning crisis thing like 3 times and I'm just filled with questions. So I'm like, just tell me. So I think that's how it will go.
John, just give me the definitions of all the words in your glossary, please.
Oh yeah, no, that is a separate discussion. That will be like a Bible. But
Yeah,
but no, so exciting things coming and similar, I think similar to what you're doing, but you're much more um capable of understanding scientific theories, I think, physics and all these things. I don't know how you do it. Really, I find it
I don't.
extremely impressive. And
I don't.
I get this from my family members as well. Just like, how is she so good at at this? But really, you are. And I know if you say you don't, you don't. But you can keep up, and that's something very, very admirable. So
Well, I
that's
can
really
keep
awesome.
up for that moment, but then the next thing that comes along, all of the stuff that I learned for that moment just out the door and the new stuff
Yeah,
comes in. I
yeah,
guess
that's amazing.
I have a filing system in my head that I just keep updated all the time. So, but I've forgotten more than I ever learned, that's for sure.
Well, I guess it's not. It's sometimes it's not about memory. It's about the participation and the understanding in the moment. Because
Yeah.
we're all gonna
Yeah.
lose the memory anyway.
And I think if I do have a skill, my skill is for being deeply curious about a lot of things. And so as I'm exploring all these different things, stuff pops out for me that ties to, it's just this relevance realization thing that ties things together in my mind. Probably wouldn't tie it together in anybody else's mind the way it does in my mind. And so I can kind of see this thread that moves through. But in order to explore that thread, I have to try to learn a lot of things, which is sometimes kind of exhausting.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that.
Yeah,
But you have
but lots of fun, and I get to meet people like you. So
for sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been great fun. Really, guys, this book is incredible. I have definitely not done it justice today, but
yeah,
please do give it a
or
read.
me, I have not done it justice because and I'm sure people are going to say, well, she was, that's not what happened on the second trip to the mountain. Okay, so I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, but
We all
it's the
do.
general drift. So
That's good.
really good talking to you, Lucas. Have a great evening and a great, I guess Halloween is coming up, you said. So
It's coming up. My birthday is a Halloween, so would be a lot of fun.
seriously, your birthday's
Yeah.
on 10/31?
Yeah, my dad's as well, so there's some symbolic stuff. I'll ask Jonathan about it.
Oh yeah. So my husband and my daughter birthday are one day apart.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but
I wonder what it
not
means.
exactly the same day. So
Anyway, thank you so
okay.
much.
Bye
Hope to
bye.
speak to you again. See you.